I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, the vote in the United Nations General Assembly slamming the United States for formally recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Only 7 nations voted with the United States and Israel in opposition to this UN resolution, none of them frontline countries. 35 countries abstained, another 21 countries were absent, perhaps intentionally. But 128 nations voted for the resolution sponsored by Yemen and Turkey, which rejects America's unilateral recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. And among those countries slamming the United States for recognizing Jerusalem are Great Britain, France, and Germany, as well as 25 other European Union countries. By the way, among the 35 countries that abstained were Australia, Canada, and Mexico. In other words, all the major nation states of the United Nations voted for the resolution, and against the United States, not a single major world nation voted in support of the United States on this issue. Now, votes in the General Assembly are not binding, in contrast to the votes in the UN Security Council, which are binding. On December 18th, the United States did veto a Security Council resolution that called on all states to refrain from building diplomatic missions in Jerusalem, an obvious response to President Trump's announcement that the U.S. was going to build a new embassy in West Jerusalem. So this resolution is, in essence, purely symbolic. What's the real significance of the resolution? Well, for some reaction and analysis, I'm most pleased to be able to turn to a man who may well now be a preeminent scholar on international law and clearly the preeminent defender of the State of Israel, and he's soon to be publishing yet another book, this one chronicling his more than 40 years of defending the Jewish state. Professor Emeritus at Harvard Law School, Alan Dershowitz. Alan, thanks for making time for us again on JBS, and I want to begin by asking you to expand on a column you wrote for the Gatestone Institute, which was then republished in the Allgemeiner, in which you blame President Obama for all the furor over Jerusalem today and this UN General Assembly vote.
Yeah, I voted for Obama. He called me into the Oval Office. He asked my advice about the Iran deal. And what he did in December of 2016 created this whole problem. Out of pique against Netanyahu and anger and in violation of many, many years of American policy, he refused to veto a one-sided UN resolution that handed over to the Palestinians, basically, the Western Wall, Hebrew University, Hadassah Hospital, the Jewish Quarter, and required Israel to bargain to get all those places back. It was he who changed the status quo by engineering that Security Council resolution. And to his credit, Donald Trump, for whom I did not vote, restored the balance by issuing a statement saying, I'm not changing the status quo or the circumstances. The borders will still have to be negotiated, but I'm recognizing the reality that Jerusalem is Israel's capital. Trump did the right thing. Obama did the wrong thing. It's redundant to say the UN did the wrong thing. The UN always does the wrong thing. It was Abiy Ibn who once said that if Algeria issued a resolution saying that the earth was flat and that Israel flattened it, it would win 162 to 23 with 48 abstentions. So that's what happened at the General Assembly. And at the Security Council, everybody was wrong and the United States was right. It's not the first time that everybody has been wrong about the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody believed that the Jews used to kill Christian babies and use their blood and matzah. They were all wrong. Everybody was wrong when they said that Israel shouldn't be established as a nation state for the Jewish people, and it was, and it's been incredibly successful. So the world's been wrong, Obama's been wrong, Trump's been right, Netanyahu's been right, Israel's been right, and the United States is now on the right side of these issues.
Okay, I understand your point that the Obama resolution, even though there was a claim that the United States only voted for it, was not behind it. You have suggested that the United States...
He engineered it. No,
yes.
it was Obama who engineered it. I have to tell you, a number of the states who voted for it didn't want to have it. They were hoping that maybe it would be delayed or postponed or not voted on at all. And it was Obama who engineered it, pushed countries like New Zealand and Egypt and others to get it on the agenda, personally directed that the veto not be used. He has to take, he's taking complete credit for it, so he has to take complete blame for it.
I understand. I want you to help me understand, though, how does, Boa, I was wholly supportive, and you and I spoke about how it was wonderful what Trump was doing. I don't understand, however, how it redresses something that Obama administration did in the Security Council, how Donald Trump's recognizing Jerusalem in any way counters, and you make a tie between them. I want you to explain to me why.
Sure. Well, first of all, I think what it says to the world, that the United States now, the current administration, does not accept that Security Council resolution, the lame duck resolution of December 2016. They don't reject it. Mm-hmm. They don't accept it. The best evidence is the Security Council try to undo it. Of course, it was vetoed by the United States. Second, the objection to what Trump did is that he changed the status quo. My point is he didn't change the status quo. Obama changed the status quo. The Security Council resolution changed the status quo. Before that Security Council resolution, nobody except the most extreme people would have imagined saying that the Western Wall was occupied territory. Occupied from whom? It was never properly in the hands of anybody but Israel. Certainly Jordan captured it illegally and prevented Jews from praying there. The Hebrew University, Hadassah Hospital, all built by Jewish hands in the 1920s, but the Jordanians prevented Jews from going there. Likewise with the Jewish Quarter, which was destroyed and desecrated. So for the UN to, for the first time, say that these holy places are occupied, illegally occupied territory, that's what changed the status quo. Mm-hmm. And it gave the Palestinians enormous leverage in the bargaining situation because, Palestinians know Israel is going to have to get that back. I had a talk with Fayyad, the former prime minister of the Palestinian Authority, once a few years ago when he was still prime minister. And he said, of course the Western Wall will be part of Israel, but if we get control of it, in order to get it back, the Israelis are going to have to give up multiples of acres because, as he put it to me, in real estate, it's location. And what could be a more important location than adjoining the mountain where the Holy Temple used to be?
Look, people have said that the Security Council resolutions, while they are binding, resolutions passed by the General Assembly are not. And so that, this is much to do about nothing. At the same time, it is striking that not one major world power and major Western powers, Great Britain and Germany and France, all voted against the United States in support of this condemnation of the United States recognition of Jerusalem. Does that not say something that bothers you?
Of course it does, but I think people don't take seriously General Assembly resolutions. Look, the General Assembly can only do bad. It can never do good. What does everybody remember from the General Assembly? Its resolution declaring that Zionism is a form of racism. It had no effect, but it almost got the United States out of the United Nations. And I think had they not rescinded that, the United States might very well have kicked the United Nations out of New York. And anything good, the General Assembly did. Early on, of course, it did vote to divide the mandate of Palestine into two states for two people, something Israel accepted and the Arab world rejected. But since that time, it's hard to find any General Assembly resolutions that have changed the world for good.
Yes.
The General Assembly is really just a debating society with really, really boring debaters.
I want to push you one more moment on France, Great Britain, and Germany. It seems to me, Alan, that it reflects an attitude of some of the leading Western nations of the world, not against Trump and against the United States, but against Israel. You have spoken about the fight Israel is trying to make for its own legitimacy and integrity. When you see a Great Britain, a France, a Germany, and Australia and Canada abstain, what do you become more concerned about world opinion vis-a-vis Israel?
Well, first of all, Canada would never have abstained under its previous prime minister. It would have voted no. So here we have a situation where whoever is in the Canadian government, they have a differing attitude toward Israel. I think the same thing is true in some European governments as well. But look, Israel has very good diplomatic relations with many of the European countries, even some that voted against the resolution, that voted in favor of the resolution. So what's more important is the diplomacy on the ground. Israel's diplomacy is improving much with India, with China, all of whom voted for the resolution, with African countries, with South American countries. So I look much more at actual diplomacy on the ground than at the United Nations free vote against Israel. And, of course, the Trump administration has now suggested it might not be free. It might cost them if they continue to vote against American interests.
Do you expect that to happen?
I think it will happen in some form. It may not be overt or obvious, but I think it might happen. I think Trump tends to keep his threats viable, and so it wouldn't surprise me if that did happen.
Okay, so the UN has become notoriously anti-Israel, if not anti-Semitic. There are some in the Jewish community who suggest that the United States should withdraw, or that Israel should withdraw from the UN. What's your reaction?
I don't think that's a good idea. I think that it's moving in the right direction generally. The new Secretary General is much more balanced in his views toward Israel, and he's recognized the anti-Israel bias of the UN. I think Nikki Haley's presence at the UN has changed things. Didn't change the votes, obviously, but it changed attitudes. Danny Danon has done a very good job standing up for Israel. No, I think the United States and Israel stay at the UN. The United States maintains its veto at the Security Council, and the fight has to go on within. It's like, people ask me, how come I stay in the Democratic Party when the Republican Party is so much more supportive of Israel? Because I want to fight within. I want to make sure the Democratic Party remains supportive of Israel. I want to make sure that Israel remains a bipartisan issue and not a leverage issue in any election in the United States.
Yes.
So that's why I think you stay, you fight, you don't quit.
Okay. Last question, bottom line for you. The General Assembly votes to censure the United States for recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. In the end, Alan, we're looking to you. How big a deal is this? How much should this concern the American Jewish community? How much is this upsetting and annoying, but of very little significance?
I think the latter. It's upsetting, annoying. It's representative of something, but it is of little or no significance. Israel ought to continue to do what's right. The United States ought to continue to do what's right. Look, I would not have favored unilateral recognition outside of the context of some peace agreement unless the Obama administration had engineered the anti-Israel Security Council resolution. It was that pushed me to urging that the Trump administration recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. There'll be time to move the embassy there. There's no preclusion of Jerusalem also serving as a capital if there were to be a Palestinian state developed out of negotiations between the parties. So I don't believe that the recognition of Jerusalem changed the status quo. I think it just recognized reality and helps restore the balance that was undone by the change of the status that the Obama-inspired UN resolution brought about as to Jerusalem.
Okay. By the way, I am correct, am I not, Alan, that you're about to come out with a book about your own history?
I am. Well, I'm working on it. I'm about almost halfway through. It's a decade by decade, starting literally in 1948, and it goes from 1948 to 2018. Describing how every decade has been different in defending Israel. I'm just finished the decade that followed the 67 war. I'm up to the beginning of the 73 war now. in my writing, and I hope to have it done in a couple of months.
I cannot wait for this book, and as soon as it comes out, you and I will sit together. As always,
Great.
I thank you very, very much
Thank you.
for spending
Be
time.
well.
We'll
Take
talk
care.
again. Thank you, Alan. The thoughts of Alan Dershowitz, whose most recent book is entitled Trumped Up: How Criminalization of Political Differences Endangers Democracy. Also joining us now is another figure on the American Jewish scene who has been a tireless advocate for both civil rights and human rights in this country and around the world, and also for the state of Israel. It's always a great pleasure to welcome to JBS the Executive Director of the American Jewish Committee, David Harris. David, thank you so much for giving us time again.
It's always a pleasure, Mark.
David, you've said now, in response to the UN General Assembly vote, once again, UN member states have chosen to succor Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas's misguided strategy of internationalizing the conflict instead of pressing him to negotiate directly with Israel. That is about as clear a statement as you can make. I now want, in general, your reaction to the UN General Assembly criticizing the United States for doing nothing more than recognizing the fact that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel.
Mark, I think you've just said it. I can't say it any better. We have to remember what's going on here. This is about the fact that, first, every country in the world has the right to declare its own capital, except for one, and we all know which one that is. Moreover, every other country has the right to recognize someone else's capital. The United States has done nothing more than recognize Israel's capital. And by the way, what President Trump did was something that his predecessors, both Republican and Democrat, also said they would do. Unfortunately, they didn't do it, but they offer the same view, Mark. And finally, by resisting this, the UN has once again made the search for peace even more complicated than it's already been. Because basically what it's done is it's given the Palestinians a gift. It's told the Palestinians, you have veto power over Israel's right to declare its own capital, and at the same time, we don't recognize Israel's right. Therefore, what confidence will Israel have in the United Nations and its role in the region?
By the way, you make it sound so clear. It's so obvious. David, we just saw Great Britain, Germany, France, in addition to the abstaining nations, Canada, Australia, Mexico. Every major nation in the world piled on this UN resolution. They don't see it the way you do. I want to know what this says to you about the world community's attitude, not simply to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but to the state of Israel itself. Does it in any way worry you on a greater level, on a greater scale, because of what it says about other nations' attitudes towards Israel?
So, Mark, I would approach it a little differently. And I would say that in this case, and I'm usually not a big fan of abstentions, but in this case, we have to look at it differently. More than one-third of the UN member states refused to go along with this charade, which, let's remember, was begun by such luminary nations as Yemen and Turkey.
Yes.
Okay, let's remember where this began and how it originated. So that's number one. So even an abstention in this case against the mob, against the automatic majority, means something.
Okay.
So, yes, 128 nations supported this. Did they support this notwithstanding the cogent arguments that we tried to make? Sure, but not because they have counter-arguments, Mark.
Correct.
But because politics is what this is all about. Because this is all about kissing up to the Arab League and the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and the non-aligned movement and yet there are a few sort of glimmers of hope here, even in this. Number one, more than a third of the nations either abstained, voted against, or didn't show up. And if they didn't show up, Mark, it was for a reason they didn't show up. And number two, within the EU, which really pressed hard to keep the member states together, 6 member states, all Central European nations, all nations that we at AJC have had very close ties with, all 6 nations bucked the EU trend and said, we're going in a different direction. And we particularly applaud them because, Mark, there was a lot of pressure on them. I have to say, and AJC has had a very long, deep relationship with Germany. We were the first to engage with Germany after the war. We have an office in Berlin. We have very close ties. The German decision to vote in favor was particularly noteworthy and profoundly disappointing.
Yes.
I mean, again, there are others out there that we're disappointed in, but unfortunately in this case, I've got to highlight Germany.
Yes. And by the way, I understand your comment about what it means for a nation to abstain, and they don't pile on by abstaining. I understand it. I think it was a very important point you make, David. It doesn't answer 3 major Western powers, Great Britain, France, and Germany. Now, you've just spoken about Germany, but how does it make you feel about Great Britain and France that they want to say in a public forum, even if it is only the General Assembly, it's not the Security Council, but it is a General Assembly, what's it mean to you that Western powers, leaders of the EU, are refusing to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel?
I think we have to separate France and Britain. In the case of France, I don't think it came as a surprise to anyone. France has to be viewed in 2 ways, Mark, bilaterally and multilaterally. The bilateral relationship between France and Israel is strong, it's deep, it's wide. It does not translate into the multilateral setting. Whenever France goes into a multilateral setting, whether it's in Brussels with the EU, whether it's in New York at the Security Council or the General Assembly, France brings in other factors that are separate and apart from the bilateral relationship. That they want to be seen as a global leader, they want to be seen as a Middle East power, and for all of these reasons, there's simply no payoff that I can see in France siding with Israel in such cases. Britain was a bigger disappointment because Theresa May, the Prime Minister, is a very good friend of Israel. There's no question about it. Her comments last month after the marking of the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration were really strong. They were powerful. So Britain's a bigger disappointment, but again, I have to guess here, and I'm simply guessing, Mark, that other issues has always entered into it. Right now, Britain is in the midst of a very tough negotiation with the EU on its Brexit.
Yes.
So, did that enter into it? And here I'm just going to guess, because your viewers need to understand how the UN works. Sometimes if a country is running for a Security Council seat down the road, or it has a candidate to be the head of one of the UN agencies, or issues like that, then any vote they cast is all about those goals rather than the substance of the issue. So I'm not saying this is the case with the UK necessarily, but people who approach the UN sort of very purely and say, well, but we're on the side of right and justice here, fail to understand that the UN is above all about national interests.
Yes.
And sometimes those national interests, having nothing to do with Israel per se, get in the way of any vote on Israel.
Very interesting. All right, David, when I spoke with Alan Dershowitz, bottom line for him was, this is annoying and disappointing, but because it's the UN General Assembly, which is non-binding, there's no real teeth to it, bite to it. It's not that significant, and the Jewish community should not be up in arms. Where do you stand on that? How significant to you is this vote? Do you agree with Alan that it is more symbolic and that this is not a time for the American Jewish community or the world Jewish community to say the sky is falling?
No, it's not a time to say the sky is falling. And if you look at Israel's position in the world bilaterally, Mark, and I can go down a list of more than 100 countries on every continent, Israel's bilateral relations around the world have never been stronger in recent memory. I'm talking about Latin America, Africa, Asia, Central and Eastern Europe, North America, and, as we all know now, important parts of the Arab world. The UN is the last place you'll see that. Mm-hmm. The transition from the bilateral strength of relations to multilateral support, for reasons I've mentioned before, is a big hurdle for many of these countries. Mm-hmm. So we shouldn't confuse the two. But we should also remember that in the crunch, on an issue as important to all of us as Jerusalem, there were 65 countries that resisted the tidal wave. And all of us who care about Israel and who care about the truth should remember who those 65 countries are. And conversely, we should also remember who they're not. Mm-hmm. And when we make our decisions about different things, travel, tourism, holidays, shopping, whatever it may be, without overstating it, let's remember who our friends are.
Very good. David, it's always wonderful to speak with you. We haven't spoken enough lately. I've got to get you either in studio or one-on-one, and just to see how you're viewing the state of affairs for the world Jewish community right now. We're about to begin a new calendar year. Maybe we'll have a chance to sit after that. I wish you all the best. Kol tuv v'hatzlacha. You do fabulous work, David. And I hope this 2018 is one that's wonderful for you, healthy for you and your beautiful family. And you continue to do the work leading all of us. We are most appreciative.
Alavai, thank you, Mark, and I'll look forward to speaking with you again in 2018.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, my friend.
Bye-bye. The Executive Director of the American Jewish Committee, David Harris. There you have Alan Dershowitz and David Harris speaking about this UN vote that basically slams America for recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. My thanks, as always, to our Director, Sloan Copeland, Associate Director of JBS, Dara Golub, and to the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.